Plants can play many different roles in a landscape design. As we get into the nitty-gritty of developing a landscape design, there are several things to keep in the back of your mind. The overall style and the functions for the landscape is first. You also have to keep in mind the principles of design: balance, scale, repetition, variety, simplicity, sequence, and focal points and eye movement. Another thing to keep in mind is that plants play different roles in the landscape that are very important. One role that a plant can play is that of a key plant. These are plants that soften hardscapes or architectural features in the landscape. No matter how beautiful a retaining wall or a trellis or a pergola or a building is, it's going to look better in the landscape if it's softened. Not hidden, but softened by plants. Key plants can also break lines that might be in the landscape, such as roof lines or the vertical lines on the corners of houses that take the eye somewhere that you don't want it to go. Here's a house with a nice sized yard that has a lot of bare walls showing and a lot of roof lines that grab the eye. The house needs some key plants on the corners to keep your eye from following the vertical lines on the corners and taking your eye upward to the roof and the sky. It also needs some key plants on the right side where you see all that bare wall. Bare hardscapes or walls are harsh, while the softness of plants helps us feel comfortable in a landscape. Again, we don't need to totally hide walls or hardscapes, but we need to soften them with plants. The deck could also use some softening. It's kind of sticking out there. You see the lattice down on the bottom. Some plants softening the base of that deck would be key plants, and they would be really valuable in this landscape. Here's a cute little pond area with a stream pouring into the pond, all surrounded by rocks. The rocks are great, but the fact that there are plants creeping between them and spilling over them in some places makes it look much more natural and softened. All of these plants that are softening the rocks are technically key plants. Imagine if none of those plants were there and it was just the rocks and the water. It would feel much more harsh and uninviting. Notice how much your eye is drawn to the corner of the building here and where the roof line meets the wall and the downspout comes down. The strong lines of the building up against the sky becomes a focal point. It grabs the eye and moves the eye upward. That's not what we want. You can see a small tree is planted to the left of the corner, and it's pretty small now, but eventually it will grow up and soften or hide some of that line and roof line, which will then eliminate that focal point, and instead you'll see, or at least you'll notice, more of the landscape. Your eye won't be drawn to that architectural feature there. Here's a situation we see way too often: columnar plants on the corners of houses. What does that columnar evergreen do to your eye? Because it's quite large and dark, it's the strongest focal point in this picture, so it pulls your eye over to the corner of the house. And because it's columnar, it forms a line, or an arrow almost, that takes your eye straight up into the sky. Columnar evergreens on building corners are very common. It's a very copied landscape component, but it's really not good design. We want the eye to move horizontally back and forth through the landscape, not up into the sky. And we want the focal point when looking at the front of a house to be the entryway, not the corner of the house. Visitors will feel much more welcome if there's a clear and obvious place they should go, and if it's soft and inviting because of good landscaping. That's the entry. So corners should not be adorned with columnar evergreens, even though we see it a lot. Here's another example of columnar evergreens on the corners of houses. You can see how they kind of act like bookends, almost framing the house. But because they take your eye upward, your eye doesn't find its way into the side yard, so it makes the lot and the house look much smaller and narrower than it really is. If you look on either side of the house, there's quite a bit of yard space there, but it's kind of lost space because your eye stops at each of those columnar evergreens, and those evergreens direct your eye upward. This is a great example of what frequently happens with landscaping. People copy what was done down the road, and unfortunately, even though it's common, it's not really good design. So when you look at landscapes, look at where your eye goes, and don't just copy things. Every landscape is unique, so you have to do a custom landscape design for each one. Here are a couple of other examples of key plants. In this case, they're softening a pergola and a post. Imagine those structures without the plants. Even though they're attractive wood structures, they look much better when you only see part of them because the plants are softening them. Another type of plant or role that plants play is that of an accent plant. Accent plants are focal points in that they draw attention to themselves for one reason or another. But given the nature of plants, it may not be all year round that it's a focal point. It may only be a certain time or times when it has a strong seasonal interest. It may be when it's in flower, or maybe if it has bright fall foliage color, or even if it has interesting structure in the winter. Anytime there's one of something, it's automatically a focal point because it's different from what's around it and it'll therefore stand out. But accent plants are not necessarily single plants. They can be a group or a mass of something. So, for example, if you have a planting of 5 lilac shrubs, they're accent plants when they're in flower. Once the flowers fade, the shrubs are pretty much plain green shrubs that just blend into the landscape. When that happens, you need to have some other plants come into bloom or into some kind of particular interest to become the accent plants. In this rock garden area, it's pretty early in the season and the perennials are still growing, but the geranium is in bloom with the lavender flowers. That makes them the accent plant in this picture. Eventually the geraniums will be done flowering and something else will become the accent plant, probably the daylilies, and then the sedum. Because of the changing nature of plants, you have to plan this all out carefully so that you don't have everything blooming at once, followed by a boring green garden with nothing flowering. Here's a flowering crabapple in full bloom. It's obviously demanding attention right now, so it's an accent plant. Once the flowers fade, it becomes a plain green tree. It might become an accent plant again in the fall if the fruits are colorful or the foliage. This landscape is also in the early part of the season. It looks mostly green except for some azaleas blooming in the far back bed, next to the steel moose cutout. Those azaleas are accent plants because they are standing out right now. However, I'd say this garden needs more interest right now. Maybe a bigger patch of those azaleas would help. Sometimes what makes a plant an accent plant is not the colorful blooms, but some other feature. In this picture, the V-shaped tree trunk is probably the focal point. Even though there are some hydrangeas in bloom on the left and on the right, because the blooms are a subtle cream color, the tree trunk is still the focal point. In this case, the tree, because of its trunk, will be an accent plant all year long. The next kind of plant is called specimen plant. By definition, a specimen plant is any plant where there is only one of it. If there are two of that kind of plant but they're not touching each other, then they are each considered a specimen plant. And because there's only one of them, it's obviously different from what's around it. That will make it stand out and be a focal point. At some point of the year, it may also flower or get bright foliage. That'll make it an accent plant as well as a specimen plant. Here's a row of yews that are planted in a line as a foundation planting. They're still young and they'll likely get bigger and eventually touch each other, but right now they serve as an example of a row of specimen plants. Because there's space between them, they're technically specimen plants. They're not touching each other. Notice what your eye does. It doesn't follow a smooth, even line, but instead it kind of stops on each one of them, even for a little while, because of that space that's between them. To get good eye movement through a landscape, you want smooth lines, not jerky ones like this. Each one of those plants, because it is not touching the one that's next to it, is technically a focal point. It's a specimen plant and therefore a focal point. We only want one main focal point and maybe one or two secondary ones in any given viewpoint. So be sure that you design landscapes so that when the plants are mature, there's not open space in between them like this. Here's a collection of dwarf evergreens. There's one of each variety. Because there's only one of each variety, each of them becomes a specimen plant, and each one of them is a focal point. Your eye isn't sure where to go because there are too many specimen plants or focal points fighting for your attention. If your eye does decide on which of the plants to start with, there are no lines or eye movement to tell your eye where to go, so it circles around and around looking for something. There are way too many individual plants, too many specimen plants, therefore too many focal points in this small area. In this small of an area, there should probably only be one specimen plant, and the rest of the plants should be planted in groups or masses of 3, 5, or more to create some eye movement. Here's another landscape with way too many specimen plants, and therefore too many focal points. Both along the sidewalk and around the foundation, there are many, many, many single plants. This is decorating the yard. It's not design. There's no rhyme or reason for why those plants were placed where they are, and there's no eye movement or continuity or unity in this landscape. Plant groups are when you have three or more of the same species or variety, and they're planted close enough so that they touch each other when they're mature, but still you can count how many of them there are. So the grouping will form somewhat of a line in the viewpoint to help move the eye through the landscape, but because you can still see how many individual plants there are, that line will be slightly bumpy, and therefore the eye will move relatively slowly. Plants used in group plantings may also be accent plants at some time of the year. So if they're in bloom, um, they're going to be an accent plant. If you had a grouping of three dwarf Korean lilacs, for example, they would be an accent plant late in the spring when they're in bloom, but they're also going to be a plant group, which can draw the eye through the landscape. Here's a bed that has several plant groups. In the back is a purple-leafed rose, and in front of that, a grouping of an ornamental grass. In the very front, on the left, is a grouping of daylilies, and on the right, a group of asters. You can count how many daylilies or grass plants there are, but they are touching, so they will still move your eye through the landscape, forming a line. Mass plants are similar to plant groups. In this case, though, you will not be able to count how many individual plants are in the mass. It may be because you plant them closer together, or it may be the nature or form of the plant that makes them all blend together. Masses are very valuable in a landscape for a couple of reasons. The uniformity of the mass creates a stronger line, so it will move the eye through the landscape faster than a grouping will. It's also a great way to fill in an area between more important components in the landscape. A mass can give your eye a place to rest between focal points, for example. And masses are great for creating repetition and tying a landscape together. If you have a mass of the same kind of plant in several places throughout the landscape, it signals that the landscape was designed as one and creates unity. This planting has both groups and masses. On the left, there's a mass of catmint currently in bloom with the purple flowers. Notice how you can't count how many individual plants there are and how the mass creates a pretty strong line that moves your eye left and right. On the right side of the picture is a group planting of gold flame spirea. They're touching, but you can still count or see the individual plants. They also create a line, but that line isn't as strong, so your eye follows that line more slowly than it does with the catmint. And here's an area with pretty much all of the types of plants in it. The ornamental tree is serving as a key plant because it's softening the corner of the hard brick wall of the building, and it's breaking that vertical line on the corner of the building that would otherwise take your eye up into the sky. The cranberry bush viburnums on the right are a grouping. You can count how many of them there are, even though they're touching. On the left are some annuals, and they are a mass. You can't count how many of them are in there. They're also an accent plant because they're in bloom and drawing significant interest to themselves. And the creeping junipers in the middle are currently technically a group because you can count how many of them there are, but eventually they'll fill in into a solid carpet or mass, and then that your eye will move through them faster. All of these kinds of plants are useful to create interest and the right kind of eye movement in a landscape.